Hello everyone. So since I'm about to go off to college, I figured it would be fun to just do one last giant Thomas Wooden Railway layout on my carport and record it and post it to YouTube because why not? So I just want to give a couple disclaimers before I get into the video itself. One, this is my first time doing a layout video, so I'm sorry if some parts are a bit shaky or not completely clear or just a little awkward. And two, when I was younger, I did not take the best care of my engines, and Porter's a good example of this. So like some of my engines have very sun bleached faces or like their paint's chipped all over. I'm I I take much better care of them now, and I'm slowly going through and replacing everything. But that I would just wanted to explain the condition that some of my engines are in, or they're second, or I bought them secondhand on eBay, like Coldy, for example. So let's go ahead and start where I started on this layout. So over here at Tidmouth Sheds, the only engine over here right now is Henry, and he's pulling a goods train through. Now, we're gonna get into the left side of the layout first before we go back to the right. So just a brief explanation of where some of these lines go. Henry's line this way travels back to Muffle Mountain where Lady is at. Then the other way at the switch there goes to a signal tower which leads into the quarry. Same thing with this line here underneath the coal hopper. Then let me back up here a little bit. That line there goes to a T-switch, and then if you go right at it, it connects up with a switch that goes to the middle line of the turntable, which comes down to Tidmouth Halt, where Donald and Douglas are. But if you go left at the turntable, you come to a switch, which if you go straight at, goes under this bridge where Gordon is, then into the mountain tunnel. But we'll come back to that later. So if we follow Henry, he goes underneath this flexi-track bridge. I forget the exact name, but let me run around really quick to the other side of Knapford. So here at Knapford, Henry's line goes underneath that bridge to a V-switch, which leads to platform 1 and 2. James is sitting there at platform 2, with Scotsman over there at platform 4. At the backside, Ari and Bert are leaving Knapford Station, but we'll get into where their layout, like where they're going later on. So if you follow James's line, it converges into a V-switch and then goes into a T-switch. If you go left here, you come into this sort of Knapford Harbor / like Knapford Yard area where Arthur's sitting out with the fish vans. And if you continue straight, you go up to where Derek's at. Oh, he's off the rails a little bit. But then that bridge connects back up to that flexi bridge, then to where Gordon is. If you go over this archstone bridge here, let me fix it really quick. If you go over this bridge, go around here past the log loader onto the trees on the tracks thing, then to where Murdoch is with a goods train, and that leads up to the suspension bridge. Then if you go right at this T-switch, it leads to the log loader where Scruff and Philip are sitting there with the worksmen. They're not really doing anything, probably just sitting there. And then if you continue on, it goes to the Knapford covered bridge, which I've just used as a tunnel, which then goes to Doug sitting there at Great Waterton. And I'll get back to that in a second. Then if you follow Scotsman's line, it just curves and then goes under the elevated section of the narrow gauge layout to where Oliver is at that crossing. So if we hop back over here to Great Waterton, I've used Great Waterton as Crovan's Gate since we never got a Crovan's Gate in Wooden Railway form, or at least none that I know of. I know we got that shed that said Crovan's Gate on it, but that doesn't really count. So we have Doug sitting there with my old fake express coaches, waiting there, presumably waiting for Skarloey to pull up with his passengers. And now, if we follow Doug's line, it curves here by the suspension bridge, goes to a switch where Hero's at. Then if you just go up the other way, it goes to the suspension bridge, then down to where Murdoch is at. So now I think is a good time to go ahead and do the narrow gauge section of the layout. So if we start back here at Great Waterton, you come along here to this switch. We're just going to continue along here to this T-switch, which leads into the shed / yard area of the layout where Rusty's sitting out with some trucks, Duncan and Peter Sam. We come back to this T-switch and head along here. We come to Duke, kind of in this backcountry area of the narrow gauge railway. Then we go under this like road mountain tunnel thing to where Coldy's sitting at. If you go up that hill, you come to this bridge area with Rheneas. Now, I picture this as like the Blunden Bridge, I think it's called, in the Blue Mountain Quarry. I don't know I think that's what it's called, but you get the idea. Rheneas is sitting there talking to Merrick. If you follow the line to the switch and then go down, you go down this hill to where Skarloey's sitting at. And if you follow the switch back to where it came from, you come to the spiral mountain from, I think it was the Hero of the Rails Wooden Railway set, to where Sir Handel's at with some stone/ballast trucks. If you follow it the rest of the way down, it comes to the switch, or the crossing where Oliver's at, and then into the back side of the shed here. Now, if you go to where Peter Sam is at, you go the other way around to a switch, and if we follow that, it leads up and over to the top section of the sawmill and dumping depot. Then if you come back, it leads to a tunnel where Luke is sitting, and then finally back to where that switch is. Which, the narrow gauge section, I mean, is pretty small relatively compared to the rest of the layout, but I only have very few engines, so it didn't need to be super big. Then I'll go ahead and do the road section really quick. So it starts there at the narrow gauge sheds, goes up to where Madge is on the mountain tunnel road thingy, then over the tracks, then down to a crossing where Bulgy has just passed through into the Brendam Docks area, eventually curling around to where Thomas is at. Now, if we hop back to the standard gauge, we left off at Hero, then if we continue along, we get to Wellsworth, to where Edward, Trevor, and Neil are just sitting there talking. And if we go a little bit further, we end up at Brendam Docks. So, yes, I do have two crankies here. This is the only one that I consider to be cranky because I like the green more. This one I have plans to eventually just turn into like a standard crane with no face. If you go with the switch there, it leads to more of the dockside line where Salty's at, getting his cargo cars loaded with Bulstrode sitting there, and then Ryan's back there in that siding. Then if you follow along to the backside, it goes to a T-switch, which goes into this Brendam Docks mountain tunnel carry case thing, which I really like. I didn't use the top section of it because I bought this off eBay and it didn't come with like the clips that go here for your track. So anytime I put track there, it just doesn't sit right. So I just never use it. So if you follow it through to where Porter's sitting, which goes to this three-way switch, which is just like a yard section with some box cars, rickety, and the grain car. If you come back into here and go along this other line, it leads to where D199 is, which I use this D199 as Bear. I just haven't customized it yet to look like Bear. But that's also where that road section with Bulgy's at. If you go straight at the switch that D199 is sitting, or Bear is sitting on, it goes underneath this piece, I don't know the exact name, under the road to a switch there. If you go straight, it connects back up to where Oliver is. If you go right at it, it leads to a three-way switch where Neville's passing through with the breakdown train into the shed with a bunch of engines I don't really use all that often. So we got Stanley, Charlie, Billy, Rosie, and Stafford. And then if you follow Neville's line, it goes underneath the mountain tunnel to that stone tunnel, which goes back to Tidmouth Sheds where we started the video at. If we come back to here, to that switch Bear was sitting at, you curve, go over the road, up the hill to where Toby's at with Henrietta and a milk tanker, which leads to a switch. If you go straight at the switch, it leads down to where Ari and Bert are at. And if you come back and you go right, it leads to the T-switch that Gordon is sitting on, which eventually goes down this hill, past all the circus animals, around the curve to McCall's farm, to where Donald and Douglas are sitting at. Then if we come all the way back to where Neville is at, if you go right at the switch he's passing over, it goes underneath Toby, Henrietta, and the milk tanker to Elsbridge Station, where Thomas is at with Annie and Clarabelle, Birdie, and Sir Topham Hatt. Then if you continue straight at Thomas's line, it goes over the mountain tunnel, down, past that mail depot station near where Ari and Bert are at, and then just right into Knapford Station. So that's pretty much the left half of the layout done. Now let's get into the right half. So if we continue from where Thomas was at, it goes through this tunnel here into Vickerstown Station, where Flora, Big City Engine, Stephanie, and Boko are sitting at, and Terrence is in a field over there. Then if you follow this other line here, it just leads back into Brendam Docks. So let's see. Let's go ahead and take Flora's line. So if you take Flora's line, then it goes up underneath that drawbridge thing where Donald and Douglas are about to pass through to Daisy. Now, if you look at the switch Daisy's on, and if you go straight at it, it leads you into the quarry section of layout. So if you continue along straight here you'll find Bill and Ben with the Soda China clay cars. Then you go up through the abandoned mine tunnel, I think that's called, to where Marion's at. And if you follow that switch down, it leads you right back to Tidmouth Sheds. If you follow Marion's line down, it leads to the Soda Lumber Company thing, which we'll get back to that later. But if you come back to this T-switch, it leads you to a turntable where Gator's at with Mavis, just a standard troublesome truck, and I think that's the Soda Railway Repairs flatbed. I don't have the rest of them though. If you follow this line, it takes you past the Arsdale barrel loader through the lower section of Morgan's mine to that switch near where Lady's at. If you take the line Gator is on, it leads you back around, curving out to the other side of, I forget the exact name of this piece, but it's like a big loader thing. You know, trains come up with cargo, it knocks it over, and they'll dispense it down over there where Mavis is at. You go over the crossing, the other way leads to where Mavis is at, and then if you go this way, it leads you to where Den and Dart are at the Soda Dynamite Factory, and then Harold's in that field over there. Then you continue the rest of the way through. It goes underneath the crane to this switch here near where Daisy's at. So then let's take another step back and go to, let's actually go back here to Brendam where this T-switch was. If you follow this T-switch, it takes you to the Soda Paint Factory, around the curve up here to the double wide old iron bridge where D261 or the Diesel or whoever you want to call this mini name Diesel. If you follow his line, it takes you around this shed to where Molly's sitting at talking to Samson. If you follow the switch inwards, it takes you into like the Vickerstown / like International Engine Shed. So here at the shed, we have Dennis, Gina, Ashima, Connor and Caitlin, and Vinny sitting here at the sheds. If you follow Ashima's line, it takes you underneath this bridge to where Boko is sitting at with a goods train. Then if you take this straight line out of the sheds where no one is sitting at, it takes you to a switch, which then leads to Hank at the Hat Street Crossing, into the backside of Vickerstown where Stephanie is sitting out with Old Slow Coach. If you follow the switch here, it leads you to the Chinese Dragon, just sitting here at this old signal box looking thing. If you go straight at the switch, it takes you underneath this bridge that Percy's passing over, which we'll come back to that in a second, into Sudbury, where Spencer's at with the Knapford Express coach, which then just leads into the backside of Vickerstown where Big City Engine is. Then if you go straight, it goes over that drawbridge to where Donald and Douglas are. So if you come back once again, if you go at that switch where the Chinese Dragon is, you go straight to the Marin signal box. If you go this way, it leads you back to where Molly and Samson were. Then if you go this way, it leads you over the Marin Archstone Bridge into the Diesel Works. So over here we have Norman and Paxton just sitting talking at the T-switch. Well, Norman's a little bit off the tracks. Then Diesel's over here shunting some covered troublesome trucks. You follow the curve along to where D199 is, where Workman's been knocked over, but I'll fix him really quick. Which leads into the main Diesel Works area where Diesel 10 is sitting out with Splatter. If you follow Diesel 10's line, it takes you through the backside to the Soda Lumber Co. log loader building, back into the quarry. If you follow D199's line, it goes straight back, connects up with Splatter's line, and then goes to Muffle Mountain where Lady is at. Then that's the whole Diesel Works done. And with that done, I think that's pretty much the entire layout. I'm just double checking to make sure I didn't miss out on any sections. Oh, here. if you come back to the Diesel Works where Norman and Paxton are, it comes to a switch, which if you go straight, it leads to Emily with the goods train, which eventually just leads to where Daisy's at. Then if you go the other way, it leads to another switch. If you go straight, it leads to where Den and Dart are at the dynamite stand. And if you go left, it takes you up past this archstone viaduct, or the curved archstone viaduct, I think it's called, over this bridge to where Percy's at with the mail coach, to this covered tunnel bridge, back to the old iron bridge where D261 is. And with that said, I think that is pretty much everything. So I hope you enjoyed this layout video, and who knows, this could become a yearly tradition thing where every summer I get a couple new pieces and make a new layout for y'all. But with that said, I hope y'all have a great day, and bye-bye.